Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, A Powerful Tool Set at Your Fingertips, Professional Services Tool Library. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. There's a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so that we can unmute you or submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation, and we'll also be following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Jeff Smith, who is a solutions architect here at Socius. For over 20 years, Jeff has specialized in project management, product engineering, and consulting for Microsoft Dynamics solutions at Socius. So at this point, Jeff, I believe we're ready to start the presentation and head over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who's attending. Certainly have a lot of information to cover. Our main objective today is to review and understand the components and capabilities of the Professional Service Tools Library, which is included with your Dynamics GP license. Years ago, the Dynamics GP Professional Service Tool Library, or the PSTL as we call it, was actually an extra component that you could purchase in pieces or as one bundle, but as licensing has evolved, it is now a part of the solution. And it has a variety of different components that we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about today what is the Professional Service Tools Library, what are the types of tools that will be included. We'll talk about preparation to use it, so the things that you need to do to be prepared. And then we're going to go down through the different module groups and what the tools are that are available. And we'll go through the financial, purchasing, sales, payroll, inventory, and then system compatibility tools. And then at the end, we'll talk about some things you need to think about and module compatibility with these tools. So what is the Professional Service Tools Library? It's a collection of tools for Dynamics GP. It's used for data manipulation and functional enhancements to GP. And as you will see, there's going to be some consistent tools across modules, and there'll be some that are very unique to an individual module. There's really three types that I think you'll notice. One is a modifier tool, combiner tools, and then trigger tools. And we'll talk about what each one of those provides as we go through. So first of all, I wanted to just give you a quick look. And because there's so many of them, we're not going to be working in live GP. We're going to actually show you screenshots of the different tools. But I wanted to just spend a minute with this main window for the Professional Service Tools Library. A couple things I want to point out is, first of all, you'll notice that the tools are broken down into different groups. So we have system tools, financial tools, purchasing tools, etc. And we'll go through each of these. You'll also notice that there is a checkbox to the far left of each of these, as you can see here. This checkbox just determines that that tool is available for you to use. And then next to that, you'll notice another set of boxes, but they're sporadic. They're not next to each one. And what that means is that this tool actually may affect a screen or a process inside of GP. And then the ones that don't have that box are just highlighted here, are actually activities that will happen within the tool. So this will make sense as we go through it, and certainly, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, feel free to ask questions as you need to. So again, this is the entire set of tools that are available. We'll be looking at screens for Dynamics GP 2015, but if you're on 2013, this should be really the same. It hasn't really changed from 2013 to 2015. So when I say be prepared, what do I mean? What I mean is that you need to plan, you need to make sure you understand what the tool does and if it provides the results you desire. So as we go down through each one of these, you'll see what I mean. Make sure that you always run a backup before processing. You need to be diligent on this task because data is actually being changed in most of these using most of these tools, and so we want to make sure that you, in case something would happen, you always have the ability to go back if you didn't get the result that you would hope for. And then also understand module compatibility. And so at the end of this session, we're going to talk about the module compatibility considerations that you need to make for each one of these tools. And the main things I want you to think about are, do you have what I call ISV or third-party applications that work with GP? And that becomes important because you need to make sure that if you're going to manipulate your data inside of GP, you need to understand whether your ISV products will be working alongside of that, or if there's going to if that would cause some sort of conflict. So being prepared means planning, backing up, and understanding what you're getting into before you do it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the three types of tools that I had mentioned to you earlier. We have what are called modifier tools. And what modifier tools do is they modify the record's key field. So you'll see as we go through that we'll talk about examples around customers and vendors and items and general ledger accounts. And so we have the ability to modify those records. The great thing about this tool, and the reason it's so powerful, is because not only do you change, for instance, an account number in your chart of accounts, but you also then affect all of the history for the open and historical transactions that have already occurred in the system. So it knows how to manipulate that historical data so that it provides you with the essence for which you need. Combiner tools are a little different, but really the same idea. What this allows us to do is combine two records. And the best example I always see with our clients is duplicate vendors as an example. So I would say that most of you on the line have probably run across that at one time or another. You have a vendor in the system, but a new invoice comes in, or maybe you have a new person who's entering it, and they may not be able to find that vendor for whatever reason, and so they add a second one. So now you have transactional data reside on two different records that really should be the same one. So the combiner tool allows you to combine those two records together, and it changes the changes flow to all open and historical transactions. So it will make sure that those transactions get updated to reflect the new number. The next one is trigger tools. And really there's a couple examples that I'll show you in here today. But really the idea is that if you have multiple databases or multiple companies, these tools will allow you to replicate those master records into the other companies. So that's certainly we want to make sure that you know about if you're adding a new company and you'd like to mimic the chart of accounts as an example in the new company. You certainly have the capability of doing that without importing or rekeying. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the financial series. And there really are 5 tools that I'm going to talk about here. Those 5 tools are the account modifier and combiner, the fiscal period modifier, the checkbook modifier, the fixed asset modifier, and then the general ledger master records triggers. And so we'll go through each one of these, talk about what it does and how it does it. So first of all, we'll start with the account modifier and combiner. And again, if you go back to the window I showed you earlier, you'll notice that this falls under the financial group. This window, in essence, allows you to take an account number and change it to another. There's some key points I wanted to make sure that you understand on this window. So first of all, I can do this as a one-off because maybe I've entered an account improperly, I've saved it, I've even entered a transaction to it and realized that I miskeyed it, and now the account's wrong, or it doesn't fit into my numbering scheme the way I'd wanted it to. So I can simply enter the account number as it is today and the account number that I want to change it to, and simply click convert. Now, in the case that you have 100 of these, or 50 of these, or 500 of these that you want to bring in, well, that's a little different story. So you'll notice that we also have the ability to import. And so the idea here would be that we'll have the ability to have for instance, a worksheet, a spreadsheet, an Excel document, where column 1 is the old account and column 2 is the new account, and you simply can import that data and then click convert. At that point, it will actually update the old account to the new account. So it's really pretty easy process, but again, you see that there are some pretty high stakes in regards to its changing your chart. Now, the one area that I want you to think about here is oftentimes when someone's changing their chart, they may not only be changing, you know, Department 100 to Department 101 in their chart, but they may also be changing the length and configuration of the segmentation of the chart. And so there's some considerations there that you need to make sure that you think about to make sure that this tool works as it is intended. The reason I mention that is a lot of times people are reformatting, they're adding a new segment, etc. There are ways that we'll be able to handle that, but a lot of it depends on how the software was installed, what your maximum number of segments are, what the maximum length of each segment is. So don't hesitate to ask your associates representative if you have questions. If this is something you're thinking about, make sure that you feel free to ask questions about this before you move forward with it. It's a very powerful tool and can really provide you with some great value. The other thing you got to think about as well is if you're making changes to your chart of accounts, then you'll also need to make adjustments to your management reporter reports as well. All right. And part of the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because you know as well as I do, once you create a record and you save it, you can't change the ID. And so in the case of the checkbook modifier, you can have one bank account or you can have multiple bank accounts, but once you've assigned the ID for that, it is what it is. And so this allows you to make a change to that no matter how much time you've used the old ID. So in this one is very, very simple, as you can see. And again, if you're changing multiple records and you want to import them, you can. If you're just doing a one-off bank account, then you simply have the ability to convert. The next tool that I thought was important here is the fiscal period modifier. This tool allows you to change your fiscal periods. It actually allows you to open new years that were previously closed and make adjustments. So this often happens when a company is acquired and, for instance, they are changing their fiscal year, or they go from a regular monthly rotation to a 4-4-5. So 4 week, 4 week, 5 weeks that you might see oftentimes in the retail industry. But the idea is this allows you to change those periods so that they're more in line with where you're going. All right, so the last financial tool that I wanted to mention is the General Ledger Master Record Triggers. So what all this is really doing is allowing you to copy, in this case, your accounts from one database to another. So in my example, for any of you that are familiar, is the Fabricam company. I created a second company called Tutu, and this one I'm going to copy my chart from this company. Oops, let's go back to this company. So the idea is that it keeps you from having to do an import routine, and it keeps you from having to key them in. So again, a real time saver for you as you set up new companies in new databases in your Dynamics GP environment. All right, so we're going to move on. And Rebecca, if any questions come up, just let me know, and I'll make sure we stop and address those.
Okay, nothing yet.
Okay, great. All right, so the next series of tools that we're going to talk about is the purchasing series, and you can see there's quite a few of those. You'll also notice that I have two of these that I actually have an asterisk next to. That's the vendor modifier and the vendor combiner. And the reason that I've done that is that the vendor modifier and the vendor combiner used to be included in the professional service tools library. And I'm going to go back and just real quickly notice on this window under purchasing, I don't see the vendor modifier and the vendor combiner. And that is because those have now become feature functions within the module in the utilities area instead of being a part of the professional service tools library. So I still wanted to make sure that you're aware that they existed and that they provide the functionality that you're looking for. Okay, so we have a variety of things that we have here. We have the ability to modify and combine vendors like we made reference to a little earlier. We have the ability to do 1099 modification. Just like we just showed you in the general ledger, we also have the ability to look at a tool that does master record triggers for payables, which means that we can move our vendors from one company database to another. One of the interesting things that you'll see about the vendor modifier and the vendor combiner is that while it changes the vendor ID, it doesn't change the name on the vendor when I'm doing the vendor modifier. So there's a separate tool if you want to change the name. So I may keep the same vendor ID, but I want to change the name. And you're thinking, well, why does that matter? Because I can change that name anyway. Well, the reason it matters is because you may want to go back and change all of your historical records to reflect the new name, and this allows you to go back and do that. We also have the ability to, we have a utility that allows us to do a minimum check. And also we have the ability to do what's called Payables Select Check Combiner, minimum PO/receipt number, and there's reasons for all of these, and then purchase order processing cost defaulter. So I'm going to go ahead and go through each of these on the purchasing side real quickly. So here we have the vendor combiner and modifier. So I'm going to first of all show you what this window looks like, and I'm not going to show it twice, but the idea is that the vendor combiner and modifier, you'll notice on this window we have the ability to do a vendor combiner, or we have the ability to do a vendor modifier. We have the ability to import just like we had before, so we could have column A being the old ID, column B being the new ID, and we can import and process. And then also, then if we key them in individually, I have what's called the source vendor, and then where the destination is. So in this example, I have Internash 0003 and 0002. I'm going to, and these may be duplicates, I'm going to actually move everything that is in that source vendor to that destination vendor. So this allows me to then combine those vendors together in this example. You'll also notice down here at the bottom there's going to be a progress bar as this works. So if you're doing many vendors at once, then you can do that and you can see where it is in the process. Typically when you're doing just one, depending on how much historical data you have, it should be a very quick process. The other thing that I wanted to make mention of on this, many of these tools require that you be logged in as the SA user. So the typical GP user may not have access to this. This is more of an administrative type role. And so keep that in mind as you approach this. Okay. So I'm going to continue to move on. This is allowing us to make modifications to our 1099s, a very simple window that we can use as well. And so not a lot to say about it other than it is a very useful tool. This happens to be the master trigger setup that we talked about. Notice here that I'm highlighting my vendors and I'm copying my vendors from 2 to 2, 2 in this example, and it should copy then all of my vendors into that. And we run into a lot of our clients that when they're setting up a second database, will just replicate their vendor base, their accounts, and their customers. They may be complementary businesses. There may be a variety of reasons that it's getting set up, but they may want to make sure that they're able to have that information in quickly. All right. As we continue down through the payables tools, one of the tools that is often thought about anyway is how much does it cost me to produce a check, or how much does it cost me to process a payment? So and oftentimes you're thinking, if I'm writing a check for $2.19, is it worth it? And so what this allows you to do is it actually allows you to set up functionality so that when you go to run your checks, when you select your checks, it will ask you what the minimum check amount should be. And this then will eliminate the need to produce a check for $2.19 because you can say that my minimum check is $25 or my minimum check is $50. And many of our clients actually have really made an art of this when they're, how much does it cost them to produce a check, and then they can make decisions based on this. And in the case of owing somebody $2.19, you can hang on to it and then cut that check at another time. Okay, so that's really the idea. Now, with that being said, I want to go back one more time and explain something, because that's our minimum check tool. So when I go all the way back here, I want you to take note that on the minimum check utility, you'll notice that there is a checkbox here. And so in a case on this, I have to have this box check marked, but the actual functionality exists in the check selection process. Okay, and the same be true for the next tool that we're going to talk about, which is the Select Checks Combiner. You'll notice that many of the tools that we've talked about already, like in the financial tools, none of those have that middle checkbox, because all of those get handled running them directly through the Professional Tools library. But some of these actually end up just changing functionality for that particular function inside the system. All right, so I just wanted to make sure we covered that, and I'll try to point that out when we run across one of those. So we'll go back real quickly. Okay, so the next tool that I wanted to talk about is the Payables Management Select Check Combiner. I didn't include a screenshot of the check selection screen because it looks no different using this tool or not. All this really does, and many of you can probably relate to this, is that, say for instance, that you have created your check batch, and then you go back in and you select another invoice for a vendor that you maybe didn't select the first time. Maybe it just got entered or something like that. It would then create a second check when you run your check run for that vendor. So what this tool does is, if I make a second selection of that vendor for a new invoice, it's actually going to combine those two selections and make sure that there's only one check for the vendor. Okay, I mean, that's assuming that you're not using the multiple remit to addresses, that they're all going to the same remit to address. But the idea here is that then this will eliminate that possibility of having two checks for the same vendor in a check run in the cases where you don't want it. All right, so the vendor name tool, the vendor name modifier. Now this tool is typically a one-off, so I don't see a lot of people importing this. It's more of, they've changed their name, or they're somebody entered them as kind of a slang name or an abbreviation, and you want to clean it up. So what we did here in my example is I took my client that was labeled Aaron Fitz Electrical, but their official name is AFE Inc. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually selecting that vendor, and I am and it'll automatically bring in their name, and then we're putting in what the new name should be, and then we simply click convert, and it will then make a change to the vendor, and it will make a change to the transactions that apply to that vendor. Okay, so really, again, part of the value of this tool is not only does it update moving forward, but it updates in the past. Now, there are cases where people, when they're making changes like this, and this is something you need to think about, is if I'm changing the vendor ID, it may be because that vendor's made a fundamental change to their business, and I want to track separately since they made that change, in which case you may just set up a second vendor. But in the case where it's something that you wanted to change and you want to see everything in one vendor, then you either do the vendor modifier or you do the vendor name modifier to accomplish what you're looking for. All right. So this one might leave some of you scratching your head. What is the minimum PO/receipt number? So the idea here is that in Dynamics GP, when I create a PO, I may end up ultimately deleting that PO. And what it does is it leaves gaps in the numbering scheme. And so what this tool allows you to do is basically make sure that it'll go back and fill in numbers if you choose to do it that way. So this one's not as widely used, but I know that from an audit trail perspective, it allows you to make sure there's no gaps in your PO numbering or in your PO receipt numbering. The next tool, this tool is the purchase order processing cost defaulter, and this one actually is useful from the perspective of when Dynamics GP, when you issue a PO, and the PO will bring the last invoiced cost from the vendor you're purchasing from. It may not be their current cost, but it'll be the last invoiced cost. So you may choose to bring in your current cost, or you may choose to bring in your standard cost. Now, this isn't going to apply to items that are, serial numbered and so forth, obviously. But what this does, to create the PO, it will bring in your most recent cost versus the last invoice cost for a vendor. So a lot of times people feel like this is more accurate, especially for vendors you don't purchase from very often. Okay, Rebecca, I'll take just a pause here to see if any questions have popped up yet.
We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The vendor combiner and vendor modifier options in my library, does this change you mentioned start in GP 2015? I am on GP 2013.
I think it started in 2015, but I forget. At the very least, I think it came in 2013 R2. So if you're an R2, you can. Here's how you find out. You just go into your purchasing tab on your window and go into Utilities, and down toward the bottom of the Utilities menu, you should see Vendor Modifier and Combiner. And if it's not there, then it was 2015. I can't remember for sure exactly which release. The releases are coming fast and furious lately, so.
Okay, and then when you do an import, how do you know what fields to add to the spreadsheet?
It's really simple. When we do a spreadsheet, for instance, on the customer modifier, the vendor modifier, you're just simply bringing in the old number and the new number. And column A is the old, column B is the new. So it really is very, very simple. I don't know if that answered the question, so if there's a follow-up, I'll be glad to answer that.
Okay, and that's all we have for right now.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so we'll move on to the next set of tools, which is the sales series. And this may ultimately appear to be a little bit um, redundant in many of these cases, so I won't spend tons and tons of time on it. But the customer modifier combiner work the same way that the vendor modifier combiner work. The same is true with the customer name modifier. The sales series does then have a couple fields that aren't really important on the vendor side, and that's territories, if you're using sales territories, and also salesperson. So those certainly have modifier combiner function as well. And then we also have the receivables management master record triggers. And then we also have some functionality around transaction unapply, and we'll talk about all of that as well. So on the custom, on the customer modifier, you have the ability to change an individual customer. Now, in this example, unlike the payables one, I'm doing the modifier function, but you can see that the screen looks identical. We have the combiner, we have the modifier, we have the ability to import, and then note one thing I didn't mention is then the validation functionality to make sure that what we're changing actually are valid. But down here, then you can see that my source customer was ABC Med, and my new customer number is going to be Barry Med. So it might be that we want to update that. And one of the things to keep in mind, and part of the reason that sometimes people do this, is many of your reports out of the box are sorted by the customer ID, the vendor ID, the item ID, etc. And so a lot of value comes from that. And the other thing is that maybe in some of our organizations, maybe they weren't consistent in how they numbered their vendors in the past, and they want to get consistent. And so that'll be a reason for people to make these changes. It's not that you can't operate with random and different links and things like that, but one of the things that we always recommend is, hey, I have 15 digits for my customer, my vendor ID. We don't have to use all 15, but let's make sure that we use the same number for all of our vendors and all of our customers so that when we sort our reports out by ID, it really sorts it properly. And I'll give you an example. If we were numbering our vendors from 1 to 20, most people think that when they printed a report by ID, it would sort from 1 to 20, but in reality, it sorts from the left. So it would sort with 1 being first, but 10, 11, all the way through 19 would be next before it goes to 2 and 20, and then 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so it just allows you, if you're consistent in your numbering scheme, then your sorting is going to be more in line with what you probably were hoping for. Your method is up to you. This is just a tool that allows you to change it. This is the customer name modifier and the master trigger. So again, all we're doing is copying this time our customers from one database to another. Now, this is another one of those tools that had the square box that you can check. And so what this allows me to do is this allows me to take items that are actually in history that are already applied and unapply them. And so you're thinking, well, what does that do? Well, maybe I applied a payment to the wrong transaction or something to that effect, in which case if I unapply that payment, it can actually move the transaction back into open. So that's just something to consider there. I'm going to go back one more time. So you can see that I can unapply simply by unchecking the box. It will then come up and ask me, am I sure that's what I want to do? And if it is, then it will allow me to do it. All right. Salesperson modifier. Now we don't have a combiner for salespeople. We only have a modifier. And so If someone comes in and fills in a territory for a new salesperson comes in to replace an old one, you certainly have the ability to put the new salesperson ID in. So in my case, I replaced myself with for Aaron J. And then you can click convert and it'll make that change. All right, so this one is the sales order processing customer item lookup. So this just allows you to it creates data so that you can look at a customer item number and its equivalency to your item numbers in inventory. Here's the territory modifier and the territory combiner. So this happens a lot in organizations that have territories around the country where they may, each year they go through, a reevaluation of their commission plans. They go through a reevaluation of their territories to make sure that they're maximizing their sales potential. So this just allows you to bob and weave, so to speak, to stay in sync with what makes most sense for your business. And then this one actually, this sales order processing purchase order number check is actually a very useful tool. And this is another one with a square box. So when you mark that square box, then it brings up this this window, and it allows you to check so that when you're entering a sales order, and if you enter a purchase order number, it will check to see if that purchase order number has been entered before on another sales order. But you can do that at the order level, at the invoice level, and back order and fulfillment order. I would say that normally that would happen at the order and invoice because that's where you're going to identify it first. And you might not put it on a quote because you don't have the PO yet, and the back order and fulfillment order may actually have already been created via an order and so forth. So the idea is then you can determine which documents, when a PO number is entered, it checks, and then what will it do? It can do nothing, it can warn it ask, it can stop you. So this one actually just makes sure that you're not duplicating a purchase order entry into a customer order. Okay, so that is that's more on the sales side. I'll stop again and just ask Rebecca if there are any more questions.
Yes, we have a question. When you use the modifier to copy a chart of accounts, do you have the option to change a segment?
You do, and that's why what I was saying earlier is you got to really think the chart of accounts is probably the most complicated one. So as an example, and I won't be too wordy on this, but I want to make sure that it's clear. When you install your software, it asks you what is your maximum number of digits in your chart of accounts and what is your maximum number of segments. So in my demo company, Fabricam, I have a 3-digit department, a 4-digit account number, and a 2-digit sub-account. But my maximums for those 3 segments are 6, 6, and 6. So you can actually set up what your maximums are going to be, and then you can set up what you're actually going to use. And also when you're installing that, you may say that I'm going to have 5 segments, but you may only use 4, or you only may use 3. So you do have the ability to change your chart of accounts from, say, 3 segments to 4 segments by simply taking your existing, tapping another segment at the end, and filling them with zeros. So, it becomes a strategy as to how you want to approach that. But yes, you can change the number of segments. You can even change the number of digits in a segment if you need to. Where you're going to run into trouble is if you want to add a segment but you don't have another segment set up in your maximums. If that's the case, then there's a third-party tool you have to look at to make that happen. But in most cases, with Socius anyway, I would say that we have definitely installed it and with maximums that are greater than what you're using in your original installation.
Okay, and
hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. What does the SOP customer item lookup tool do?
It allows you to define, you can have specific customer specific item numbers that equate to item numbers you have in inventory. Okay,
Okay.
so that's the main idea.
Okay, and the last question is, does the fiscal period modifier allow you to re-import a budget from Excel into that year? After using this tool, I assume you have to close the year again.
It actually allows you to open the year and then you can reclose it. And so it opens the year. So we see a lot of times where people are acquired and then they have a short year, or they have you know, they move to a different a different sequence somehow. And so you can always bring in a new budget. So there should be no trouble with that. And your new budget would then probably be more in line with what you're corresponding to your new fiscal year. So yes, you certainly can. I don't know if I answered that the way you wanted, but yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, and then last one, on the financial master triggers, are you only allowed to copy the entire chart of accounts from one database to another, or can you choose specific accounts?
Good question. We'll look at that at the end. I don't know that it gives us an option, but we'll look at it. So
Okay, that's
I'll
all
make
then.
sure. Okay. Because I can jump into my GP and we can look at it. Master selection. Okay. All right, so we only have a few tools inside of payroll. So what we have here is we have the ability to change employee IDs. Okay, and it's simply changing an old to a new, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Certified payroll allows you to add job numbers to the transaction entry window. So the idea there is a certified payroll is typically for organizations that do construction or mostly construction is what I've seen, where they require reporting payroll labor being reported at a job level. And a lot of times that corresponds with your AIA billing. So this just adds that functionality to the, and I wasn't able to produce a screenshot for that one, so I apologize for that. And actually, I'm missing a screen here. We'll have to come back to the payroll activity tracking. All right, so we'll move on to inventory. So there are, and again, this probably feels somewhat redundant, but the idea is that what this allows us to do is in inventory, we can combine or modify sites, we can change item descriptions, we can change item numbers, or we combine item numbers, or we can also do an item reconciliation. Now there is a reconciliation function in GP out of the box. This one is a little bit more thorough in the process it goes through. Oops. So here you can see that we have the item site combiner, and this just allows you to say, okay, I'm going to take my Cleveland warehouse and I'm going to combine it because I'm closing it, and I'm going to move it in with my Columbus warehouse, something to that effect. So it just allows you to combine those sites. And this just allows you to change the name. So if I move it to a new location and I don't have that location, I can just change the ID to indicate a new location. And here I can change the description. So the same concept that we've talked over and over about, whether it be customers, vendors, or now items, being able to not only change the name but then change the description and change that historically. Here we can take item numbers and combine them. So if you have duplicate item numbers, and this really gets into your strategy in regards to how do you number your items. Some people use manufacturer part numbers, some use their own part numbers. Somehow you could potentially have added an item and then added it again with a different number, and now all of a sudden you got two of the same. And this just allows you to pull those together. Now, the item number modifier, now this one actually is a little bit more commonly used from the perspective of um, maybe we're trying to come up with a new numbering scheme that's consistent across our organization for item numbers, and maybe those item numbers maybe include some logic around the maybe the grouping of the item, some type of characteristic of the item. So all of my computers start with COM, all of my printers start with PRI, those kind of things. And so if you've come up with a new numbering scheme that you want to put in place, then you can, in that case, you may have hundreds or if not thousands of items, and you can do an import on this to bring those items in. All right, and then this is the inventory reconciliation tool. And again, I'll have to validate exactly, but I think this actually does more checking around some of the transaction types when it reconciles. Some adjustments that may not have been considered in the out-of-the-box inventory adjustments or inventory reconciliation. I'll get you more information on that. All right, any questions on inventory?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the last set of items, and I think we're right on pace to end the way we need to. So what we have here is any of our system and miscellaneous tools. So we'll start off, there's a shortcuts copy, a toolkit, menu inquiry, utility, etc. And so we're going to go through those. So the shortcut copy is just allowing you to copy shortcuts from one user to another. And this one probably, I don't know if this one is all that valuable, especially since there's new functionality in GP 2015 that allows you to copy home page and some of those preferences right out of the system without using the professional service tools library. So again, I'm not sure that this is going to provide quite the value that it did before 2015. This toolkit option, I'm going to tell you that it's in there, but I've talked to several of our technicians and I only got one of them that said they've ever used this. So it sounds like it's more used in case of some support cases where the GL00105 is your chart of account index file, and sometimes it can get out of alignment. And also the SQL objects. And the way it was described to me is that there are times where during the installation, a table or procedure inside the system wasn't created properly, and the schemes in SQL do not match what GP is expecting, and therefore your functionality gets compromised. So this one is not one that you're just going to use on a regular basis, and hopefully you'll never have to use it. So I was a little surprised that this one actually got included in the toolkit altogether because it seems like more of a support issue than anything else. But I suppose the idea is that if you're talking to one of associate support contacts, or even if you're dealing with Microsoft, they may have to use this tool anyway, so it'd be good for you to have it. This is actually just a menu inquiry. So what you can do is when you highlight the menu, it gives you all of the information, the display name, the form that it opens, everything that you need to know about each of the individual menu items. So you can see in the menu group option here over on the side, we got our Dynamics GP button, we have transactions, inquiries, reports. So if you highlight each one of these and then you can get into the sub-modules, it basically is just defining to you what the technical name is, what the security is, what form you're opening, and so forth. So again, whether you'll use this very often, I'm not sure, but certainly you have the ability to use it. Updating the user date, if any of you have the issue where people actually leave their computer on when they leave the office and GP is still open? What this does is it'll automatically update the system date at midnight to the next day. It's no more complicated than that. The fixed asset modifier is a simple modifier tool like we talked about before. That fixed asset modifier allows us to it allows us to take an asset ID and change it to a new asset ID. Default add item. This basically activates an option to mark the add item selection in the options menu on the following windows. So selections, entry, purchase order, receiving, purchase order, invoice. And it's going to look something like this. This option will not exist unless that option has been selected in the checkboxes in the box. Document date verify, when it's activated and you enter a document date, a check will be performed to determine whether that document date is in a valid fiscal period or if the fiscal period is closed. So it just gives you a message to tell you if it's not. And it works in all of these different entry windows. So payables, receivables, invoice entry, payables, manual payments, etc. You can read the list. And we will make this slide deck available to you, by the way, at the end. The decimal place tool, this basically, I'm scratching my head as to how this applies, but it allows you to, if you have check amount in words, it truncates it to 2 decimals. This will be used if currencies in Dynamics GP were changed to more than 2 decimals. May not be something that you use very often. Now, this is similar to what we were talking about before, where we were copying master records. This company copy, what it allows you to do is it allows you to copy the module setup information, so the report options from one company to another. So you can see here that which modules do you wish to copy, and it basically allows you to pick the modules, and then it copies the general setup options. Okay. So what I wanted to finish with is compatibility information, and I think this could be really useful for you if you consider using the Professional Service Tools library, that you know before you start what am I risking. So you can see here that the account modifier combiner will work with core modules, analytical accounting, control account management, budgeting, Excel-based budgeting, field service, pretty much everything that is inside of GP. The checkbook modifier works with core modules plus project accounting. And you can see as we go down through here, customer name modifier, employee modifier works in the core modules plus human resources plus project accounting. With the personal data keeper, which has been eliminated in GP 2015. The item number modifier, and this is important because it works in manufacturing, it works in field service, it works in project accounting. And notice that some of these, if you're using Dynamics CRM, it actually is compatible with that as well. Here's your item number combiner. Again, manufacturing and field service play an important role as well as project accounting in CRM. The description. Oops, there we go. Oops, I'm going to go back one. Sorry. Anyway, so there we go. This is the last slide, but you can see that each of these tools is compatible with these modules and features. And so you always want to take this into consideration. So with all of that, I think I have finished with 4 minutes to spare. Rebecca, I'll let you as people maybe prepare some additional questions, take over for a moment to um, talk about some things that we have going on.
Thanks, Jeff. So just a couple of additional items we wanted to mention before we start the Q&A. All upcoming events and current promotions can be found on our website at socius1.com. Our next GP monthly user webinar will be on March 29th, covering the leveraging the cloud and Power BI to deliver actionable business information. We're also excited to announce that our annual Aspire GP and CRM customer event will be hosted in 3 locations this year, in Columbus on May 5th, Charlotte on May 10th, and Atlanta on May 12th. These events provide a great opportunity for you and your team to get in front of what's new with our products and tips and tricks on how to use your product, as well as to meet Socius and Microsoft executives and networking with other users. We highly encourage you to visit. www.socius1.com/aspire to register. And then we're also offering some great promotions right now, including 5% off Scribe Insight license or a 3-year online subscription through March 31st, and a 15% discount when you commit to a trial and purchase of any Rockton software product by May 31st. And finally, feel free to reach out to Jeff if you have any questions. His contact information is currently shown on your screen. So if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to type those out in the question box. Don't see anything right now.
Okay, but while you're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm going to, I think we had talked about the master record selection, and let's look here. Oops, there we go. Well, I'm getting an error message, so let's see what happens here. I'll have to double check that because something's not actually working the way we'd expect it to here. So I'll find out what the issue is, and then I will make sure that we send an email to the people who are attending. Any other questions, Rebecca, so far?
I don't see anything yet. We'll go ahead and stay on the line for a couple of minutes if anything does come up. But I want to thank everyone for attending and hope you have a good rest of your day. Okay, so there is a question. Do you know if there is a PSTL SDK?
I am not aware of an SDK. There is a user manual for it, but I'm not sure that there's an SDK. I know that there are some other tools that Microsoft provides, for instance, that they don't include in this library. For instance, there's a tool that will, if you don't close your year-end payables or receivables at the proper time, your year-to-date numbers may not be accurate, and there is a tool that will reconcile transactions to summary numbers to make sure those are proper so that your reporting is proper. But I don't know of an SDK for this. That's certainly something we can find out.
Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the slide deck after the presentation, so everyone will get that through the email. But we'd like to just thank you again for attending, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.